What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we're going over the Week 5 wide receiver starts and sits. As per usual, we will be going matchup by matchup, letting you know overall how we do feel about each receiving core. We'll let you know a bit about their floor and ceiling, so by the end of it, you should have a good understanding of which players we would start and which we would prefer to leave on the bench. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which wide receiver with at least 20 targets had the lowest ADOT. The correct answer was Robert Woods. Jace, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, through 4 weeks, which quarterback has had the least time to throw? Once again, that's through 4 weeks. Which quarterback has had the least time to throw? Leave your answer in the comments section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, guys, if you have 2 players valued very similarly and you're not sure exactly who to start, the best way to know who we would start is to access our rankings. They are available at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Members of our site gain access to a ton of benefits, including waiver ads with fab suggestions, what priority we would spend on them, access to the trade model, top DFS plays, sports betting picks, and more. So if that interests you, go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. With all of that out of the way, we're going to hop right into the first matchup. We have the New York Jets at home against Arizona. The Jets, even though they're playing at home, they are 7-point home underdogs. Whenever a team is projected to lose by that high of an amount, it implies there should be a pretty pass-heavy game script. This would typically give bumps to the receiving options in this game. The only one we would consider starting is Jamison Crowder. Crowder has played in 2 of 4 games, notched 7 receptions in each one he started, but unfortunately for him, the starting quarterback is Joe Flacco. As much as we like to rag on Sam Darnold, we can't say with certainty that Joe Flacco is an upgrade, considering Crowder has posted 100 plus yards in each game with Sam Darnold, a feat that is already really impressive. Crowder will unfortunately get a bump down. This will leave him at wide receiver 3 territory, making him a high floor flex play, but someone you should consider starting nonetheless. No other Jets receiver should we consider starting. On the other side of the ball, it's pretty simple. Start DeAndre Hopkins. We have Hopkins ranked inside the top 5 this week. And as for Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald, neither one of them are inside the top 50, so you really shouldn't consider starting either of them. Up next, Kansas City Chiefs versus the Las Vegas Raiders. This game has a high over-under of 55 points. Definitely heavy weighted on the Kansas City side of the ball. They're 11.5 point favorites. On the Kansas City side, we're starting Tyreek Hill every week. We have him ranked inside the top 5. Moving over to the Raiders side though, all I want to say is be very careful if you're planning on starting a Raiders receiver. Henry Ruggs, he is no longer injured, likely to play, and seeing the high total, the fact that they are nearly 2 touchdown underdogs, while yes, they are likely to have a positive passing game script, just keep in mind it could be a trap. The Kansas City Chiefs have actually allowed the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. They played teams like Baltimore, the Chargers, and Houston in week 1. So unless the Raiders bring something to the table neither one of those teams have brought yet, it's unlikely any receiver will have a great game, or if one actually does, knowing which one that is, it's going to be difficult. For those reasons though, we don't have any Raiders receivers actually ranked inside the top 50. If you do want to flex one, I can get it for the upside, but we can't recommend starting anyone on the Raiders outside of Waller. The next matchup we have is the Cincinnati Bengals versus Baltimore. Cincinnati is 12-point road underdogs. Baltimore typically gets to an early lead. Boyd, although he's been playing as a wide receiver 2, we have him ranked as a wide receiver 3. The reason for it though is because although the volume may be higher, Baltimore, they're still a very strong defense. While Burrow may be throwing the ball 40 plus times in this game, it's very unlikely that the quality, it will be much lower. So for Boyd, make sure to limit your expectations. There is the possibility for upside, but with Baltimore playing from home and knowing Kansas City is the only team to have a receiver that has scored a touchdown against them, we just have to limit our overall expectations. T. Higgins we have ranked inside the top 40. Once again though, limit our expectations. That leaves AJ Green. We should not be considering starting him. Anybody that is starting him is only doing it because they're stubborn and his name is AJ Green, because if he was any other player, he would have been benched weeks ago. On the other side of the ball for Baltimore, Marquise Brown is the only receiver we're considering. With Brown being a player that can score from any part of the field, it's actually a sneaky good matchup for him. Bengals have been beaten by multiple big plays this season. We have him ranked as a wide receiver 2. His ceiling, it's going to be high, but moving into the next matchup, we have the LA Rams. They're on the road against the Washington football team. As we all know, Dwayne Haskins was benched in favor of Kyle Allen. While we can't say it's an upgrade, it's hard to imagine it could be a downgrade. For that reason, we have not increased Terry McLaurin's ranking than we normally would. We also didn't decrease it as well. So we have him as a high-end wide receiver 2. Obviously, starting him, it's going to come with some risk. We're not starting any other Washington receiver outside of him. That leaves Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp. Both players we have ranked as wide receiver 2s this week. Kupp a high-end one. Woods a bit of a mid-wide receiver 2. Robert Woods losing some of his volume. Meanwhile, Cooper Kupp is trending upward. For you Woods owners out there, you shouldn't hit the panic button over this. This is more variance than any change in the offensive philosophy. The next matchup we have is the Philadelphia Eagles. They're on the road against Pittsburgh. This has a modest total of 44.5 points. Pittsburgh is 7-point home favorites. For the Steelers, the only 2 receivers we're considering starting are Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, who is now healthy. Despite Deontay getting more volume than Juju, we still have Juju ranked ahead of him, but both receivers, they're in that wide receiver 3 range. As for Juju, he could be considered more of a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. Deontay, though, we have him ranked just around wide receiver 30. On the Philadelphia side, we would love to tell you there was a receiver we would recommend starting, but not only is this a very bad matchup, but the Eagles target the wide receiver position at nearly the lowest rate in the league. Up next, Carolina Panthers on the road against Atlanta. Atlanta's defense has been decimated with injuries. Even to begin the season, they were a very beatable pass defense for receivers. Now, it's hard to imagine any team would struggle against them. Teddy Bridgewater, even not known as a top 10 passer, he should have a lot of success in this game. This means DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, they are both going to have very high ceilings. This game should be very telling for DJ Moore. If he can't produce against Atlanta, we really should question putting him in the lineup. Both receivers we do have ranked in the wide receiver 2 range. Robbie Anderson obviously ahead of Moore. So for Anderson, a high-end 2. DJ Moore will be more of a mid to back-end wide receiver 2, but definitely one we believe has plenty of upside. Moore does lead his team when it comes to end zone targets, which means when they're in scoring distance, they're looking for him first. On the Atlanta side though, we have Julio. He has a questionable tag. We don't have him in the rankings as expected to play. He didn't practice on Thursday, but we have Ridley as a mid-grade wide receiver 1. That leaves Russell Gage. We have him ranked in that flex territory. While he is likely to be the 3rd option, he has had 2 receptions in back-to-back games, and Matt Ryan really didn't look so good the last time we saw him. The next matchup we have is Jacksonville against Houston. Houston is 5.5-point favorites in a game that should have a total of around 54 points. Starting with Jacksonville though, DJ Chark came back in a massive way last week. He had 8 receptions, 95 yards, but scored 2 touchdowns. This week we have him ranked as a wide receiver 1, indicating we don't think his last week's results were a fluke. So if you have him, start him with confidence. But if we are believing that Chark is going to produce again this week, that is going to impact the other receivers on this team, that being Laviska Shenault, Keelan Cole. Laviska Shenault we have as a back-end wide receiver 3, a potential flex this week, but Keelan Cole, we have him outside the top 50. On the other side of the ball, at this point, we also can't consider starting Brandon Cooks. I believe the only way Cooks becomes a fantasy starter again will require a Will Fuller injury. Speaking of Will Fuller, we have him as a back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. Last week, he posted his second game eclipsing 100 yards. He's also now scored in back-to-back games, but we should not be considering starting any other Texans receiver. Up next, we have Miami Dolphins on the road against San Francisco. The big news in this one is that Jimmy G appears to be healthy. Obviously, when he's healthy, he will be the starter. The only issue, though, is that we haven't seen Brandon Ayuk play or Deebo Samuel play with Jimmy Garoppolo. It's difficult to project out exactly what they will do. So both receivers we actually have ranked in that flex range. And that's not to say that we don't believe they could produce. It's more to say each one of them does have a significant chance to bust. As for Miami, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's the starter. This could very well be his last week. And although we know Ryan Fitzpatrick loves targeting Devontae Parker coming off of a game with 10 receptions, the Seattle Seahawks, they have allowed a massive amount of points to that position. So we knew he was going to have a big game. San Francisco, they are much tougher against wide receivers. They rank 8th in fantasy points allowed. So Parker, he's more of a wide receiver too, and Preston Williams at this point should not be considered by anyone to be a starter. New York Giants on the road against Dallas. The New York Giants are 9-point underdogs. This game has a projected total of 51.5 points, and this is a really good spot for Darius Slayton. We've seen the type of upside he's had since he began being a starter in this offense. We know he has multi-TD upside as well as 100 plus yard upside. In the Dallas Cowboys defense, it is extremely beatable. Odell Beckham completely popped off against them last week, so this definitely puts Slayton in that wide receiver 2 area. As for Golden Tate, we have him ranked in the flex range, but usually we do like to put players in that have proven to have a lot of upside in the flex. From what we've seen from Tate, he really hasn't shown that upside, but regardless, he should have a very safe floor. Over to Dallas, though, we have CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup. Both of them we have ranked as back-end wide receiver 2s. Despite CeeDee Lamb producing more, Michael Gallup, he still should be started. Amari Cooper we have as a solid wide receiver 1. So if you have a Dallas receiver at all, try to get them in your lineup. Moving on, though, we have Indianapolis against Cleveland. Indianapolis is a 1-point road favorite. And even despite Indianapolis not being a heavy favorite here, it's hard to trust any Colts receiver. T.Y. Hilton, the most talented receiver, presumably, and even with the Cleveland Browns allowing near the league leaders in fantasy points to wide receivers, we wouldn't be surprised one bit if T.Y. Hilton busted. No other Indianapolis receiver we're considering starting. So moving to Cleveland, you'd probably surprised we have Odell ranked as a back-end wide receiver 2. Yes, he's coming off of an extremely high game, but in every other game he's started, he's been struggling. The Indianapolis Colts actually have 2 games this season in which they have held a team to under 100 receiving yards at the wide receiver position. So Odell, he's not going to have that massive ceiling we saw last week. His floor, it's also going to be a bit lower. The same will go for Jarvis Landry. We have him ranked outside the top 30. He's still a wide receiver 3, but somebody we would feel much better putting in the flex. The next matchup we have Minnesota versus Seattle. Seattle 7-point home favorites. And this game also comes with the highest projected total on the week. Each one of them gives up a ton of yards, a ton of touchdowns, so you can boost the rankings of every receiver in this game, starting with Minnesota. Adam Thielen we have ranked inside the top 5. Justin Jefferson can be started as a wide receiver 2. And while he may have some risk for being a rookie, we've seen the type of upside he can have on a per target basis. The passing volume overall should be a bit high, so his ceiling is going to be very high in this matchup as well. On the other side of the ball, DK Metcalf we actually have ranked as the number 1 overall receiver. Clearly, we're expecting big things. That's not coming at the expense of Tyler Lockett. We know he's coming off of a bad game, but we have him ranked as a mid-grade wide receiver 1. We aren't starting any other receiver in this game, so we'll move into the Monday matchup, LA Chargers versus the Saints. The Saints are 7.5-point home favorites in a game with a projected total of 51 points. The big news in this one is that Justin Herbert has actually been named the starter for the rest of the season. There was always that fear in the back of our heads as Keenan Allen owners that if Tyrod did come back, Keenan Allen turns from a wide receiver 1 to basically a wide receiver 3. While Justin Herbert is the quarterback though, Keenan Allen, he's actually a wide receiver 1. Although we don't have him ranked there in this matchup, we expect him to produce more of mid-grade wide receiver 2 numbers. Herbert overall, it is a massive upgrade. The reason we don't have Allen ranked high this week is because the Saints can actually be a sneaky strong defense. There is a chance that Herbert just gets dominated this week despite what we've seen thus far. So even a player like Keenan Allen, who has a very high floor, it's just hard to imagine he hits his ceiling. Mike Williams, even if he plays, we shouldn't consider starting him. Even while he was healthy, the upgrade from Tyrod to Herbert, it really didn't prove to impact him all that much. So leave him on the bench, take a wait and see approach. That's the best course of action for Mike Williams. On the Saints side of the ball, we have Michael Thomas, who should be potentially suiting up for his first game. Anytime Michael Thomas plays, we're going to put him in. I don't care what type of snaps he sees, whether it be 60%, 70%, or even 50%. Michael Thomas, while he is on the field, he is one of the best fantasy receivers in the league. If Michael Thomas does play though, that makes Traquan Smith, Emmanuel Sanders virtually bench players. But for these two, if you are owners of them, if you see Michael Thomas is actually ruled out, each one of them is a viable flex play. In that scenario, we would still rank them very closely. We know each one of them can have a better game than the other depending on where the pendulum swings, but neither one is ranked higher than a flex. Moving on though, we have the Tennessee Titans versus Buffalo Bills, possibly going to be played on Tuesday. If you want my honest opinion, I just don't think this game is going to happen. I mean, the Tennessee Titans have had 10, 20 players already confirmed as having COVID. AJ Brown, so far from what we know, he could potentially play, but Corey Davis, he has been put on the reserve list, and AJ Brown we haven't seen play so far this season. For that though, we can't really recommend starting him and expecting fantasy points. If you want to put him in the flex and maybe hope he has that upside being the only wide receiver, then by all means, go ahead, put him in your flex. And as for Buffalo, Stephon Diggs, we have him ranked as a back-end wide receiver 1. He has been getting a ton of volume, deep targets as well as end zone targets, so he's going to be one of the safer wide receivers against one of the possibly weakest defenses. Plenty of upside, of course. As for John Brown, a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. Just keep in mind he is still recovering from his injury. That has led to more volume for Cole Beasley. But even with more volume, if John Brown sees the field, I wouldn't even start Beasley as a flex in a PPR league. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.